This video was brought to you by my loyal patrons. Pledge today and you can participate in choosing what video comes to the channel next. Link in the description. Whenever people reflect on Thomas the Tank Engine and friends, more often than not, this is what they remember. The synthy theme song, the model train props on actual sets, the real steam, the insane practical crashes, the static faces and moving eyes that do 360s. This classic era of the show is beloved by all, and it's where a lot of Thomas's charm came from. For 12 seasons, Thomas stayed true to the style. Until 2009. In 2009, Thomas entered the world of CGI. Gone were the Wonderland sets and props and practical effects, and with them went a lot of fans' interest in the series. I think the general consensus around CGI Thomas is that it's not as good as the old stuff, and that is valid, I think. CGI steam effects or a CGI crash will never look as impressive as a real, physical one. With the arrival of CGI also came a new writing style that just was not good.
Thomas felt terrible. Thomas felt terrible. Thomas felt terrible. Thomas felt terrible.
Alright, I get it!
I would be lying though if I said CGI Thomas didn't have high points. It'd be an outright lie to say that it didn't have good seasons. In fact, it had quite a few great ones. Mattel bought Thomas in 2012, and with their takeover came a new writing team, headed by Andrew Brenner and Ian McHugh. Together this team brought us some of the best Thomas content we've had since the 90s. 5 solid seasons of episodes that featured surprises, respectful homages to the original source material, and plenty of wink-winks to fans.
They're even gonna write about me in a book and show me off in moving pictures on the television too.
Don't be silly. That's never gonna happen.
But it did happen, didn't it?
I'm here today to give this high point era of CGI Thomas some love and talk about what I think are 10 rather overlooked episodes. These are episodes that I think are genuinely great and did something wonderful, like utilize good storytelling, or develop a character in a meaningful way, or just do something really inventive for the series. Episodes that I don't see people really talk about that often. I mean, some might be talked about a lot, I don't know, I don't look at Twitter. Now, we've all seen the really great CGI episodes like Tit for Tat or Love Me Tender, and I've talked about ones like Henry's Hero like 4 times now. Everyone loves those, they're undeniably awesome. So we're going to try to stay clear of those well-known greats. The point of this video is to shed some light on overlooked episodes. 10 hidden gems that will make you appreciate this era of Thomas just a bit more. Let's dive in.
I mean, we had parts snap off and bits come loose. Some engines I work with even exploded. Kapow!
Cautious Connor is about, well, Connor, one of the newer characters introduced in the series. Connor is a super fast streamline engine that prides himself of being bang on time.
Bang on time, I'm 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 bang.
But one day he goes a little too fast and breaks a side rod. The event scared him so badly that even after he is fully repaired, Connor is afraid to go fast again. He completely loses his self-confidence. And only after a very encouraging Rocky-esque pep talk from Steven does Connor get his confidence back. On paper, this sounds like a really simple episode, like a concept that has been done before, and it has, many times. But where this episode shines is with its characters. The entire cast of this one, barring Thomas of course, are all new characters, ones that old fans of the show are probably not that familiar with. Connor is one of those new characters that very clearly does not fit in with the show's environment. This is a giant American streamlined Hudson in neon blue colors in a quiet English countryside setting. He's garish and looks out of place and comes off as just another gimmick character for the sake of toys, which isn't untrue. But if there's anything that this era did well, it was that it actually developed its new characters, no matter how gimmicky in concept they were. Connor's fear is pretty understandable in this episode. It's an irrational fear, but it doesn't matter. It's like people who are afraid of flying or of heights. They can't help it. He's flawed, and you actually kind of feel bad for him, especially in how he vocalizes it.
It was kind of scary. I mean, I heard a big bang and felt something snap.
I also love this bit when Steven is taunting him. He has this moment where he gets mad and almost goes off on him, but then he stops himself.
But you're not too fast for me anymore. I could race laps around you.
You can tell Steven struck a nerve there. It's subtle, but it's character. By the end of this episode, Connor feels pretty well realized, like an actual character with flaws and desires, not just the new toy of the year. Steven too, wow. I think most of Steven's likability comes from his voice actor, Bob Golding. His pep talk is scarily inspiring, just by the way Golding delivers it.
Then get out there and prove it! Go on! You can do it! You can be bang on time!
Steven is the fictionalized version of Stephenson's rocket, a real engine. And he's such a fun character because all his wisdom and experience is drawn from the real-life engine's history.
We had parts snap off and bits come loose. Some engines I work with even exploded! Kapow!
These all actually happened. Pretty grim stuff, but Steven takes it all in stride.
But did they give up? No! They picked themselves up, got their parts back together, and carried on racing.
I love his enthusiasm, even at his old age. Cautious Connor is a great episode that showcases all new characters at their strongest. If you're one of the old fans that sticks their nose up at all the gimmicky new characters in the show, try giving this episode a watch. You may be delighted with what you find here.
Did those engines you worked with really put themselves back together after they exploded?
Don't be silly, Thomas. No!
Oh, thank you, sir. I do my best.
Then you won't mind picking up Annie and Clarabelle so you can carry more passengers.
The rail car and the coaches features the most unlikely pairing I never expected to see in the show. Annie and Clarabelle, and Daisy. Wow. In this episode, Thomas is sent to work at the quarry for a few weeks, so Daisy returns to resume passenger services on his branch line. Daisy can carry passengers on her, so Annie and Clarabelle are not needed. But Daisy can't just let the two rest in peace. She has to insult them.
Oh, are you two still here?
How dull it must be for you.
I can go anywhere I like, but you have to wait for an engine to come along.
I never pull coaches.
That's just rude.
Rightfully, Annie and Clarabelle are angered by this. So when they finally get the chance to, they pull a prank on Daisy that goes a little too well.
Everybody off! Everybody out! I need to speak to a professional.
Daisy thinks something is wrong with her, and Annie and Clarabelle get stranded out on the line. All's well that ends well when Sir Topham Hatt figures out what happened and reprimands them all. It goes without saying that Daisy is a real standout in this episode. I don't think this is her first CGI appearance in an episode officially, but it was the first episode with her released to the masses back in 2016. And man, oh man, did she come back to the show swinging. Tracy Ann Oberman voiced Daisy, and she did such a great job bringing the character to life. I'm really happy they got Daisy her own special VA instead of having one of the main cast members take her on. It really helps separate her from the rest of the characters.
I'm highly sprung, you see.
Tip-top and thoroughly modern.
Annie and Clarabelle are the stars of this. For the first time, I think, ever, we see a more devious side to these two. A side I didn't know they had. This is yet another one of those wonderful episodes where it doesn't portray either of its mains as in the right. Annie and Clarabelle are just as wrong in this as Daisy is, and all get what's coming to them. In a simpler version of this episode, Daisy would outright be the antagonist, and Annie and Clarabelle would be the heroes that triumph over her at the end. But no, instead they play a mean trick that gets them in trouble too. It's such a nice breath of fresh air to see side characters like Annie and Clarabelle be in the spotlight. But it's also nice to see them, who are usually naggy and portrayed as being the voices of reason, be in the wrong for once. I never expected to see a scene of Sir Topham Hatt telling off Annie and Clarabelle of all characters. Everyone is flawed and awful to each other. I love it. Thomas is at its best when everyone is unapologetically savage. The petty rivalry between these three is not a one-time thing either. It's continual, touched on in other episodes following this one. In a later episode, The Way She Does It, Daisy is gloating about something, and it cuts to Annie and Clarabelle just rolling their eyes at her.
I am picking up a group of entertainers and taking them to Harwick to put on a show. Ooh.
Solid continuity there. I recommend this episode particularly because its mere concept is pretty mind-blowing to me. This whole rivalry came to be because of a single line of dialogue all the way back in Daisy's introductory story.
"This is better," said Daisy, "but whatever is that rubbish?" The rubbish turned out to be Annie, Clarabelle, and Henrietta, who were most offended. "We won't stay here to be insulted," they fumed.
Never again did Daisy and Annie and Clarabelle interact again after this. She just insulted them once this one time, and that was it. Writer of this episode, Davey Moore, took this one line and wrote a whole script out of it. That's just so inventive and clever to me, and now it's a solid character rivalry that they can play with in later episodes if they'd chosen to. If you're familiar with the original Daisy episode, then I highly recommend The Rail Car and the Coaches.
But Annie and Clarabelle said I was grating, and I can't hear anything.
So, that means...
I must have a problem with my hearing as well. I'm off to the diesel works to find me fitter.
Right then, let's see if you can keep up with me. Ready? Steady?
Okay, this is the third episode in a row from Season 20. I know. It should be no shock that Season 20 is going to get a lot of love in this video since it's, like, the best one. But I will look at other seasons, I promise. Over the Hill is about Stephen and Glyn. Glyn, the vertical boiler dubbed Coffee Pot Engine, has been recently restored and relocated to the Earl's Railway Museum at Ulstead Castle, alongside Stephen. Both engines are extremely old and have historic value. Stephen, holding the honor of being the first steam engine ever built, is crestfallen when all attention is turned to the newcomer. Jealous of him, he challenges Glyn to a race to settle who is the best engine of all.
Boy, I don't think the Earl or the Fat Controller were like that.
Oh, are you scared?
I love this episode. It just has everything. It's another one of those CGI episodes that's focused entirely on new characters. And just like Cautious Connor, they're all extremely lovable. I love that Glyn has a backstory that is shown to us in a flashback. I like that the rocket's real-life history plays a vital role in Stephen's characterization again.
I beat 4 other engines at the Rain Hill Trials.
But what I love most of all about this one is its humor. This is a very self-aware episode. A race between two ancient engines is ridiculous in concept, and they play it to the full extreme. I love how the first act builds up all this tension between the two characters, leading up to this big race, only for it to start and completely subvert the audience's expectations. They roll out going like 5 miles an hour, and the episode just becomes a chuckle fest from that point on. What I love even more is that they subvert expectations again. Halfway through the race, the two old geezers just completely forget they're even racing, cause dementia, I guess, and just start complaining about the current state of the world and start throwing pot shots at passing engines.
Would you like a cup of tea with that, young Gordon?
The episode just forgets this race they were building up was even a thing, and it becomes these two just being old geezers together. I love it. It subverts expectations in the best way. If there's one thing that CGI Thomas was that the model era wasn't that often, it was genuinely funny. This is a banger of an episode featuring the Statler and Waldorf of Thomas. A total laugh fest. Check it out.
Terrence! Go back! Go back!
Don't worry, I'm almost at the other.
An episode in the 21st season that is a sequel to an episode in the first season. Only 20 seasons apart. Did we really need this? Well, let's talk about it. This episode is about Thomas and Terrence, and is infamously Terrence's big return to the series after a, 10 season hiatus? Can't believe they even brought him back. Terrence is helping men cut Christmas trees down in the fields besides the railway. Thomas collects the trees and takes them to the big station. They often catch up, and Terrence reflects on the time he saved Thomas from a snowdrift, complete with a CGI recreation of the episode from Season 1.
I don't need that heavy, uncomfortable plow. Snow is silly, soft stuff. It won't stop me. Cinders and ashes. Oh, I'm stuck.
One day, Sir Topham Hatt sends Thomas to collect a big tree near the lake Terrence is working at. Terrence, who is pretty chuffed about his being able to go anywhere with his caterpillar tracks, chugs across a frozen lake to the tree. On his journey back, however, cracks start to form. With Thomas's help, Terrence is saved before he falls into the lake, but the tree isn't so lucky.
I'm sorry, tree. I'm sorry.
This is admittedly a pretty simple episode, but what I think makes it so great is its heart. It's a sequel to a, at the time, 33-year-old episode, but it works because, well, have we ever seen Thomas and Terrence interact after that? Barely. I like how it acknowledges the past events, and it stays totally true to them. The canon isn't changed. I also like how it squares both characters out. In the past episode, Thomas was the hothead and Terrence rescued him. Now Terrence is the one that got overconceited, and Thomas rescued him. They're total equals now. I've seen some people say that Terrence is out of character in this episode, and to that I say, is he though? Did Terrence even really have a character in the original episode? Or any episode? Not really, if you ask me. He kind of just showed up wherever and was helpful, but like, that was it. He's kind of boastful in a Railway series story, Toby Takes the Road, which actually aligns with his character here. If they want to make Terrence self-confident, I say go for it, because he honestly was pretty much a blank slate to begin with. It may be overt fan service to bring Terrence of all characters back, but I think they handled him quite well. He got some much needed characterization, and it acknowledged the past with honor. A very sweet, albeit simple, episode. It's a sequel to an episode from 21 seasons ago that no one asked for. But boy am I glad we got it.
Why is everyone getting on the wrong trains today?
It's your new public address system, sir.
It can't be.
Passengers wishing to travel to train is ready to board at platform.
Oh dear.
PA Problems is, wait for it, a Sir Topham Hatt episode. Yeah, not often we get many of those, huh? In this one, Sir Topham Hatt decides to update the public address system at the big station with a brand new one, for no reason other than the new one looked impressive to him. The new PA system turns out to be rather faulty, and causes more problems than it solved.
Oh dear.
After he realizes his mistake, Edward goes to save the old one from the scrapyard before it's too late. This episode reminds me a lot of the one from the classic series, The Fogman, from Season 6, in which Sir Topham Hatt learned a very similar lesson. In fact, that episode has basically the same plot as this. Sir Topham Hatt decides to use a new version of something just because it's new, but it ends up causing more problems. And he learns that just because something is old doesn't mean it's outdated. As much as I like The Fogman, I think PA Problems is the superior episode. First, because Topham updating his PA system in this didn't cause a man his livelihood.
What will Cyril do now, he asked. He will be getting a much-needed rest, said Sir Topham Hatt. Poor Cyril, he's been scrapped.
Damn, Topham is ruthless. And second, because of how the moral is delivered. At the end of the episode, Edward comes in to save the day as always and says this line.
Just because they're old doesn't mean they're not useful.
I'm never a fan of when a moral is outright said in episodes, but they couldn't have chosen a better character to vessel this. Edward may be referring to the PA system literally here, but it's also a solid sum up of himself as a character. Edward is old. That's like the main thing he's known for. But time and time again, he has proven he is just as capable as any other engine. A great use of his character in CGI, if you ask me. What's so funny about this is that this episode, with this moral, is placed in Season 21, right before the Big World Big Adventures reboot, where they changed everything in the show to be flashier and faster paced, and also got rid of Edward. How awfully ironic, huh? Edward is basically written out of the show at the end of this season in the episode A Shed for Edward, which was written by Lee Pressman, who also wrote this episode. I wonder if this scene was supposed to be like a subtle knock, or maybe foreshadowing? Who knows? I think the moral here is really solid and well delivered. Overall, a very entertaining episode, where the character who learns the lesson is Sir Topham Hatt himself. A rarity indeed. It also has this scene of Reg the Crane rocking out to music, which is just so endearing. Way to make a pretty nothing character likable, huh?
And then there was trouble.
Luke's New Friend is an entirely narrow gauge focused episode. Now that is a real rarity in the CGI series. Yeah, there's no Thomas in this one, or any standard gauge engines. Paxton has like a 2-second cameo, but that's it. It's all narrow gauge. This episode spotlights Luke, his first time in the limelight since his introduction in the movie Blue Mountain Mystery. At the end of another busy day, Luke stumbles across a lost fawn that found its way into the quarry. He tries to befriend it, and when it starts to take a liking to him, Luke decides to keep it as a pet. This, of course, does not work out, and Luke has to learn the hard way that a loud industrial quarry is no place for a deer. This episode has a ton of heart, and that's why it works so well for me. Luke's motivation to keep the deer is pretty understandable.
He does belong here. It just takes a little while to fit in. That's all. He'll soon get used to it. Just like I did.
He sees himself in it, looking back on the events of Blue Mountain Mystery where he ran and hid all the time because he was scared. That's a really introspective motivation, I think. Much better than just, I want to keep it because it's cute. I also love how the other engines, even though they clearly don't agree with Luke's decision, all still try to help him out. They work quietly not to scare the deer, but of course it doesn't work. And it's obvious that it wouldn't work, but the fact they tried at all, despite the reality of the situation, shows how much of a family unit this narrow gauge clan is. Eventually, Luke has to take the deer away and heads off to Ulfstead Castle, where the fawn reunites with its mother, and Luke has to learn to say goodbye.
That's okay, friend. Off you go.
I really love this scene. There's no narration, it's just a nice, quiet moment where the two share a last look at each other. I love this little detail here too, Luke's driver giving him a pat on his cab to comfort him. That's adorable. This is a ridiculously sweet episode. Everyone cares about each other, even the nameless mute engine crew. It's heartwarming. It's the type of episode that ends with you having a warm, fuzzy feeling inside of you. A feel-good episode focused on a rather obscure cast of characters in an era that didn't really give them that much love. Check it out. Another Sir Topham Hatt-centric episode on this list, you ask? Well, if you look at just the title, yes. But this isn't really a Sir Topham Hatt episode. It's an ensemble episode. In this one, Percy overhears some damning dialogue from some station workers that suggests Sir Topham Hatt quit.
The Fat Controller won't still be here, will he?
No, he won't be here. I'll find out when he's going.
Well, the sooner he's gone, the better.
The engines all conclude he's leaving because of how much trouble they all cause him, so they decide to work as hard as ever. However, their worries are only worsened when Percy witnesses the same men moving everything out of Topham's office.
We'll come back for another lot in a minute. We have to clear everything.
When everyone hears the news, they conclude Sir Topham Hatt isn't quitting. He was sacked.
So they really are throwing him out.
We'll have a new controller, I suppose.
In an effort to keep Topham as their controller, the engines go on strike. There is a lot in this episode that is reminiscent of very early episodes and stories in the series. The engines all going on strike for one, which was a common thing in the early years. What I love about this though is that their going on strike is not out of selfish reasons. They're doing it in an attempt to save their boss. That's actually really sweet. Sir Topham Hatt has this bad rap on the internet as being like an evil dictator that treats his engines like slaves. And this episode is an excellent counter to that. No, he's a father figure, and the engines in fact all love him and will stand up for him when he's being threatened. Hell, even Diesel puts on a happy face to please him. Sir Topham Hatt being sacked is, of course, just a misunderstanding. At the end of the episode, it's revealed only his office was being redecorated, which is actually a hilarious in-joke because this episode is right at the end of Season 19. Following this season is the movie Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, where... Yeah, so much for that new office. The engines totally misunderstanding the situation makes them actually quite naive, and I really love that. This is something so true to the books. The engines are not, like, idiots per se, more so just ignorant to human concepts. They're machines. They don't have the same knowledge and experiences of the world that people do. Here's some examples. Thomas not understanding how fishing works and wants to do it himself.
I want to fish, but they all had the same answer. Engines don't go fishing.
Bert not understanding how books work.
We've got visitors today, said his driver. One takes moving pictures, and the other writes books. I don't want to be a moving picture in a book, protested Bert. I want to stay as I am.
Or Percy thinking a scarf will somehow warm his funnel.
My funnel's cold, he puffed. I want a scarf.
In this episode, they don't understand the concept of an office redecoration. So to them, it looks like Sir Topham is leaving. Andrew Brunner wrote this episode, and he proves here that he has a good understanding of the characters' perspectives within their own universe. Overall, I think this is an incredibly sweet episode. One that feels true to the spirit of the books, and one where all the main characters, despite their differences, come together and join forces to help a greater cause. There are very few things that will make snobs like Gordon see eye to eye with the likes of Thomas and Percy, and one of those few things is their undeniable loyalty to Sir Topham Hatt, the man who keeps them all in steam. I love ensemble stories, and this is, in my opinion, one of the best ones. Confused Coaches is a Gordon and Spencer episode. In fact, it's the only Gordon and Spencer episode in the CGI series. A pretty crazy realization, right? I totally thought these two had more episodes together, but I guess not. When Spencer was introduced way back in Season 7, it was a pretty striking introduction because he actually showed up Gordon, something that's never been done before. Gordon, the top link proven best engine on the railway, had finally met his match. An engine that was objectively better than him, in all regards, and he wasn't about to let Gordon forget that. Spencer is Buzz Lightyear, Gordon is Woody. The newer, better engine came along and dethroned the king.
I was only trying to be useful, grunted Gordon.
Whenever Spencer popped up in the show following this episode, they always had some fun toying with this rivalry between the two. Gordon feels emasculated and feels he always has something to prove when Spencer's around. And Spencer is a smug douche who knows he's better and likes to shove it in his face.
I'm faster and finer than all the engines on Sodor put together.
Spencer's just a big silver show-off, sniffed Gordon.
I'm obviously faster than you are. I'm streamlined.
A never-ending loop of pettiness between these two. Never did I expect the show to reach a sort of conclusion to this series-long rivalry. Confused Coaches is, basically, the end-all be-all to the Gordon and Spencer tiff. The episode starts out pretty standard fare. It's New Year's Eve, and Spencer is back on Sodor to haul a special dinner train for the holiday. Him and Gordon are throwing smacks at each other as usual.
If numbers are so important, then why is Thomas number 1 and you are only number 4?
Well, you don't even have a number.
Spencer decides to pull one over on Gordon by sitting at his platform, forcing Gordon onto the one beside him. This causes a whole kerfuffle as the wrong trains are unknowingly coupled up to the wrong engines. Spencer ends up with the Express and Gordon with Spencer's dinner train. Only after Gordon realizes what happens, he sets chase after Spencer and the race is on. Of course, everything gets sorted out at the end, and both engines are rightfully reprimanded. Pretty entertaining episode so far, but what really pushes it over the line for me is the ending. In the final scene of the episode, after all the mess is sorted, Spencer and Gordon are encouraged to apologize to each other, and surprisingly, they do so without argument.
I'm sorry I took your platform and upset all your passengers.
And I'm sorry I teased you about which platform was the best. There's not that much of a difference, really.
An earned, genuine moment where these two see each other as they are. And in the spirit of the new year, the two finally put their differences aside and start a new leaf.
It's a new year and a new start for you both.
This episode came about in the show's 21st season, and it is the final time we see Gordon and Spencer interact. Other than a quick cameo in season 22, Spencer never appears again. It really feels like this was the intended final appearance of Spencer, and the writers wanted to give him and Gordon a proper bookend. I think the biggest disappointment of the CGI series, for me, is that it often sticks to the status quo. Characters are never allowed to really grow and change greatly. They may experience growth in one episode, but then reset when the next one starts. Confused Coaches, however, is a noteworthy episode in my opinion, because it is a rare example of characters growing and changing and putting rivalries to rest permanently. At long last, Gordon and Spencer are finally friends. If you are a big Gordon or Spencer fan, I highly recommend giving this one a watch.
Happy New Year!
I'm highly sprung. A bump like that could be bad for my swerves, not to mention my...
Bye,
Daisy! So rude.
Springtime for Diesel has made its way towards the top of the list of my favorite CGI episodes. As the title suggests, this episode is about Diesel. Can we talk about the title for a second? The title is a play on the title Springtime for Hitler, which is a musical that was written for the 1968 Mel Brooks film, The Producers. They referenced a Mel Brooks film in Thomas. They referenced Hitler in Thomas the Tank Engine. They compared Diesel the train to Hitler. I can't get over that. That's absolutely hysterical. Whatever big wig at Mattel that let this slide has a great sense of humor. In this episode, Diesel is being his normal CGI bully self, bumping into others rudely for the sake of being a jerk. He bumps Daisy one day, which later proves to have damaged her. Daisy's highly sprung springs snap and she has to go out of service to be repaired. When Diesel catches wind, he starts to feel guilty. He goes through the stages of denial, of course denying it at first.
I wonder what happened to her.
How should I know?
Then he gets angry.
Have you heard the news, Diesel?
And finally, bargaining. One night, while he thinks Daisy is asleep, he creeps up to her and basically spills his guts out.
I'm sorry for shunting into you the way I did, Daisy. I really didn't mean to cause you any trouble.
He starts out simply apologizing, but it opens a floodgate and he starts ranting about basically why the way he is.
Other engines aren't nice to me, so why should I be nice to other engines? And they blame me for everything.
He's rude because he has this preconceived notion that everyone judges him before he does anything. All he really wants is a friend.
I like you. Although after this, I don't suppose you'll ever want to be my friend.
When this episode first came out, I thought very little of it. I saw it, I thought it was decent, and then I moved on. But somehow, it keeps working its way back into my scripts as an example of writing good characters. I have talked about this episode in detail in the past because it really is something special in my opinion. Never did I ever think we'd get an episode that goes into the psyche of a character, especially the show's token baddie. You can trace Diesel's disdain for everyone all the way back to his first appearance, where all he wanted to do was make a good first impression in front of everyone.
Is that James and Henry and Gordon too? I am delighted to meet such famous engines.
His ego got in the way, and a prank from Duck caused him to make a fool of himself, and it's all been downhill ever since, ultimately because of his bad decision making as a result of this. This look into what makes Diesel tick alone is great, but the episode doesn't stop there. After Daisy is finally repaired, Diesel tries to reconcile with her again.
Are you all fixed up now, Daisy?
Yes, thank you, Diesel.
But she doesn't forgive him. In a typical kid show, hell, in even a typical Thomas episode, after the wrong character says their heartfelt apology, they're forgiven and the lesson is learned. But not this time. Daisy doesn't forgive Diesel and berates him.
If you want to make friends, Diesel, you need to change your ways.
This is such a good character reflection that shows just how far along Daisy herself has come as a character. When she was first introduced, she was just as bad as Diesel is now. Selfish, egotistical, acting all on impulse. But over the series, including the season just before this one, she gained humility, and as of this episode, became pretty mature. She grew up. Daisy looking at Diesel now is like looking in a mirror of her former self. Since their debuts, Daisy's character journey was steadily uphill, while Diesel's went down. It's only after this scolding does Diesel decide it's finally time to make a change. When the next opportunity comes for him to bump Daisy, he resists, and instead is cheerful to her.
Good morning. How are you today?
Diesel! Well, gosh, I'm very well. Thank you for asking.
He can't make her forgive him, but he can take the first step to reconciliation. This episode ends with this very hopeful line from the narrator.
Maybe Diesel can make some more friends. If he really can learn to change his ways.
And leaves the audience with some hopefulness for him. I absolutely love that. We don't necessarily need to see Diesel reform. We just need to know that he's finally on the right path. It leaves it up to our imagination where he goes next. How I would have loved if this was the last time we ever saw Diesel in the series. It is a shame that they don't stick to this character progression. In the very next episode, which is also coincidentally another Daisy and Diesel story, Diesel is pretty much back to being his old self. I know episodes get swapped around in production. It's totally possible a most singular engine was written before Springtime, but the order changed. But it ultimately doesn't matter because Diesel is just a stupid bully again in the following seasons anyway. He never changed. Even though Diesel ultimately didn't reform, I love that this episode implies that he could. The overall message is really progressive and uplifting. No one is bad without reason. Everyone has their inner demons. Even the most dastardly can find a path to redemption. A very well-written episode of the series that uses its characters in such a wonderfully dynamic way. I highly, highly recommend this one. Easily one of my favorites. There are a lot of things that are inconsistent in the CGI series. But one of the most inconsistent things is Thomas himself. The CGI series tends to want its cake and eat it too with him. Sometimes they want Thomas to be the cheeky, pricky, egotistical self he was in the early books and episodes. But then sometimes they want him to be the voice of reason and be mature. He tends to fluctuate depending whatever the needs of a particular episode are, and it leaves me wondering ultimately what type of character Thomas is supposed to be in the CGI series. There is one certainty though. The episodes that focus on Thomas on his branch line are always consistent. These are the stories where it's very clear what kind of character Thomas is. Mature and self-reliant, but also a little playful. I think these episodes tend to work really well because of the established cast in this part of Sodor that he always bounces off of. Like Birdie, for instance.
Why are you crying, Thomas? Have you lost another race?
It's not me crying, Bertie.
And especially Annie and Clarabelle. Annie and Clarabelle never really became characters until the CGI era of the show. Before, they were basically just NPCs that Thomas always pulled around. Random coaches with stickers for eyes. And it was pretty easy to forget they were even alive to begin with. With CGI and moving faces and all, it's a little harder to ignore, so they kinda have to make them speak and interact with Thomas. And thank God they did. Ever since Annie and Clarabelle spoke for the first time with their own voices in Blue Mountain Mystery, they've been constants connected to Thomas. And it was this episode from season 18 where they totally and finally solidified this trio as an inseparable unit. Let's dive in. The episode starts out just showing what Thomas and Annie and Clarabelle's relationship is like. Annie and Clarabelle are always nagging him.
He's doing it again, Clarabelle. I agree, Annie. He's going dreadfully fast.
And Thomas always tries to push the boundaries with them. They banter and argue a lot, but they do all clearly love each other, even if sometimes they don't really show it. Things get a little shaken up one day when Thomas has to leave Annie and Clarabelle in the yard in a hurry to deliver trucks. While they're in the yard, Charlie gets the two mixed up with Caitlin the Streamliner's train, and they get coupled up to her.
Now, don't go too fast, Thomas. Thomas? You're over there!
Annie and Clarabelle are suddenly awoken from their nap to find themselves being taken on the ride of their lives. Thomas witnesses this and sets chase after them. It's now a race across the island of Sodor for Thomas to stop Caitlin before she heads off into the mainland with his precious coaches. Right away, this episode impresses me with how it tackles its concept. Somehow, this is an idea that they've never done before. Annie and Clarabelle being coupled up to a high-speed express train. It's a gimmicky concept, but somehow the episode never feels like it's stepping out of the realms of realism. It somehow just works. And I'll tell you why this works. Thomas is why this episode works. Thomas sees his coaches being put in danger, and without a second thought, without any hesitation whatsoever, he hauls ass after them. He doesn't care he's jaunting out onto the main line where he could be hit by an oncoming train. He doesn't care that he might not have enough water. He doesn't care that he has to race to the complete other side of the island at full speed. All that matters to him here are that his coaches, the two people he cares about more than anything in the world, are in danger and they need his help.
Annie! Clarabelle!
It's like his primal mama bear instincts just like flicked on and he was all in. If Annie and Clarabelle were coupled up to this train and say had an entire adventure of their own and then came back to the yard before Thomas returned, this episode would not hit as hard. It's the emotion that comes from Thomas's chase after them that makes this such an exciting watch. Once again, all the main characters featured here are dynamic and have an arc. It's another one of the glorious episodes where no one on each side of the conflict are either right or wrong. Annie and Clarabelle learn to never complain about Thomas going fast again.
I'll never complain about Thomas again! Nor will I!
And Thomas learns Annie and Clarabelle are the most important people in his life. You never realize how important some things are to you until they're gone forever. Of course, though, it's a kid's show, and it has a happy ending. Good old hero saves the day and comes back to Sodor with them. All reconcile, and it ends with the three traveling off into the sunset together as a unit. An absolutely amazing episode of Thomas and Friends. I've done a lot of thinking about what my favorite episode of the CGI series is. There's a lot to choose from. Springtime for Diesel is up there, Henry's Hero of course is fantastic, and all the well-known greats like Tit for Tat are of course amazing, but I think this is it. I think Not So Slow Coaches is my favorite CGI episode. Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle are like the most iconic core members of the show. They're the only ones that appear in every single intro. And here is a wonderful, heartwarming episode that really showcases just what each one of them are all about and what they mean to each other. This is a silly talking train show for kids, but goddamn, does it sometimes almost bring a tear to my eye. Now, are there other great CGI episodes, you ask? Well, duh, yeah, of course there are. There's plenty. But I can't talk about all the good ones. But hey, if this video does well, maybe I'll do a part 2. We'll see. I would say that I've created a playlist of all the episodes here so you can go and watch them, but unfortunately Mattel has been pretty livid lately about Thomas episodes on YouTube. Fortunately, all the seasons that feature the episodes I've talked about here are all on Amazon, and you can watch them all for free with Prime. I think that is currently the best place to watch Thomas episodes online, since they don't seem to be streaming anywhere else, at least right now. Or, just go buy the DVDs. Mattel can't take those away from you. We stan physical media in this house. That's all from me today, folks. I hope you all enjoyed that. I've been meaning to make this video forever, but it would never win the Patreon polls, so it just kinda kept getting put off. I finally said, you know what? F it. I'm just gonna make it anyway because this is something that's been on the list forever and I want to do it. Once again, a major thank you to all my patrons for their support amid the channel takedown kerfuffle and me getting back on my feet on this one. If you want to continue to support me and my content, Patreon is the best place to do so. We'll all get through this together. See you all in the next one, folks. Bye!